Welcome to On the Level, broadcasting from the Blue Ocean Network studios here in Beijing. My name is Fergus Thompson. Now, you might understand perhaps why an Irish-American comedian would, in Ireland, take up the Irish language to the point where he could tell jokes and perhaps do a routine in the native language of his forebears. But what would drive that same comedian to come all the way to China, learn a notoriously difficult language, and then not only break into the stand-up scene in China, but actually become involved in setting up a scene where one didn't really exist before? Well, that's just one of the questions I have for my guest today, Des Bishop, multilingual.
Well, three-lingual. Trilingual.
Trilingual man of comedy. Des Bishop, welcome to On the Level.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Listen, just to give a bit of background, Des, that accent, the little we heard of it there, is far further west of Dublin than Galway. You're here now in China. Where does Des Bishop actually come from?
Yeah, my identity's confusing. I was actually born in London, so I'm going to confuse it even further. Right. I was born in London. At an age of about a month old, my parents took me back to New York. My mother was a New Yorker of Irish parents. My father was a sort of a English-Irish mix, you know. But Cork in his blood, but he had lived between the UK and Cork all his sort of young life. And then grew up in New York till 14. And then at 14, I got kicked out of school, but actually there wasn't like a big deal. I mean, the joke I tell on stage is that I got kicked out of school in New York for having a problem with alcohol, which is partially true, but it was not why I got kicked out of school, but the problem with alcohol was true. So my mother came up with this ingenious idea to send me to Ireland to go to boarding school, which was always a laugh because people would think of all the places to send your alcoholic child to. That's probably not the ideal place. But anyway, long story short, I went to boarding school in Ireland and hadn't intended to stay forever. But then, anyway, I went to college in Ireland, and when I was in college, I studied comedy, and then I never left. It wasn't the plan. I went to Ireland on my own at 14. The only thing that's left about me that's American is my accent. I've been in Ireland since I'm 14. My entire professional career has been in Ireland. I mean, I have an international career, so to speak, but I'm an Irish comedian in terms of where I evolved and everything.
And we should point out here that in Ireland, people have to learn Irish, which you didn't have to learn it in school because you went there.
I was exempt.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, that series that we made about the Irish language was probably partially inspired by the fact that my first year in Ireland was third year in school, so it was the intercert. It's the last intercert, actually, and an Irish exam for middle of school, for those that don't know. And they made me sit in the Irish class. I didn't have to do it, but they just didn't know where to put me, I was like a unique individual. I didn't have to do, I didn't compulsory, whatever.
Yeah.
However you put it, my English has gone terrible since I started learning Chinese. It wasn't compulsory for me anyway. Maybe if I'd come in first year, I would have given it a shot, but I wasn't going to try to learn enough to do the intercert. But I had to sit there every day and listen to these poor guys go through this language that none of them wanted to learn. And it was always in my mind. I was like, I'd love to learn it. It feels like such a waste that I'm sitting here, but I couldn't learn it at the level they were doing it at. Anyway, I never learned it, and obviously people hate it. So then years later, I was just dying to learn it. And after I made the first television series that I made in Ireland.
This is in another one?
Yeah, this was called the Des Bishop Work Experience. It's about living on minimum wage.
Okay.
But then RT were looking for me to do something else. And it wasn't the next thing that I did, but the next thing that I pitched to them was a thing. I was like, I'll learn Irish to do stand-up comedy in Irish.
This is in the name of the father, right?
In the name of the father, yeah.
You explain people who don't know what a father is, how that comes about.
Yeah, that's a plan. I mean, in Ireland, that's a genius title, but to everybody else, it's just a New York accent saying father, what a father, in the name of the father. But father is the accent in Irish, and it changes the way you say a vowel. So in the name of the father is basically a pun, like an Irish language pun. And so I moved to the west of Ireland. A lot of people don't know that, actually, that there's still parts of Ireland where people speak the Irish language. So I moved to one of those places where Irish is still a living language. Because, you see, for some people, they might go, who would care about a television series about a guy learning Gaelic, But, you see, in Ireland, it's a big issue. A lot of people resent the fact that they had to learn it. Officially, it's the first language of the country. A lot of people don't realize that either. Everything has to be bilingual, like in official letters and government stuff. And the government sort of pays, lip service to the Irish language, but then they sort of throw it to the wayside. So anyway, it's a big topic in Ireland. So I was happy to be able to connect into that.
So you went and stayed with a family who spoke this Irish at home. Yeah, I mean, we just have a look now and see exactly, give people an idea of what that was like.
Oh,
Hey.
Des!
How you doing?
Oh, Kevin to How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Jeez, you know my soda. Hello, I wasn't expecting you so soon.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
Come here, I'm going to just show you Gail. This is Gail. Do you want to speak English to your Irish, or?
Well, everybody says that it's better if you just speak Irish to me all the time, and I'll just struggle through it.
So, K12.
What?
K12. That means, how are you?
Oh, Tommy Gama.
Oh, wait.
I'm Gaeilge for you. Logically, you can see the connection with Ireland, but you decided to do the same thing here, make another series of coming to a country and learning it, and comparing the two languages. First of all, why China?
Yeah, well, the why is actually, the Irish language show is the last step in the why I came to China. I mean, I guess it's like a 5-step process. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with Kung Fu movies. They were actually on New York television every Saturday. It was just like a show that was always on. There was always a Kung Fu movie from like that glory period of Hong Kong Kung Fu movies. So I used to watch them every Saturday. I used to think it was the greatest thing. And then when I was in my early 20s, I started learning Kung Fu. And I'm really obsessed with China. My shifu was from Hong Kong, and he used to take us for dim sum every Sunday. And I started watching all the Kung Fu movies again, and I found better ones. And coincidentally, at that time, when I made the first series about living on minimum wage that we mentioned before, the Des Bishop work experience, I ended up working with a load of Chinese Dongberan, who
That's
had
the northeast of China,
the northeastern
sort
people
of the earth,
that had sort of flooded into Ireland for some reason during the boom time, and I got really friendly with them over that month of working with them in Abracadabra in Waterford in a kebab shop, and you know, they were being treated quite badly actually by the drunken people, and so, you know, we sort of bonded. And in 2004, I came to visit them. I went to Dalian, and then I traveled around China for a month. And like any foreigner that's come to China, I was blown away by how different it was. You know, we were joking before we came on air about how people were saying to a Chinese person you knew in Ireland, like, oh my God, you know, how did you get out? You know, because like there is this perception that China's like this dangerous place, you know.
That the Great Wall doesn't go through it, that it goes around it.
Yeah, you know, and I was just shocked by, well, how different it was to what I expected, but also just how friendly people were, and all the cliches I'm sure you've come across a million times on this show. So I was just trying to tell people when I went back. But then my mother's from Flushing, Queens. Like, I grew up in Flushing, Queens, which just another coincidence is now completely Chinese, which happened in my lifetime. And every time I would meet Chinese people, I was desperate to connect with them because I'd had this experience in China, but I just had nothing, you know? And the desire to learn Chinese was there since I'd gone to China. But then when I made the series about Irish, when that was done, I was like, this would be a great way to do a series about China, because it was 2008, the Olympics was coming up, and everybody was talking about China. And I really did think that this could be a great way to show the Western world what China's like. Now, I'm not a propagandist for China or anything, but I did want to show another side. Because as I joke in my show in Ireland, whether or not you can say this, I don't know, but China is more than just a man in front of a tank, and that is what the West perceives China to be. You know, they have an image in their head, it's embedded there. So I wanted to show them that there's more than 1.3 billion people than an image or one simple narrative that the Western media feeds all the time. And I'm not saying that those stories aren't true, but I'm just saying that there is a narrative that everyone has bought into, and that narrative is way too simplistic. And through learning the language, the one thing I learned about learning Irish is when you learn the language, you connect with people in a different way, and you understand things you would never understand unless you learn the language. So I thought showing the process in a fun way would be a great way to show people something about China that they wouldn't understand other than following this process. And then the stand-up comedy part is just the fun part, because to make people laugh in their own language, or to make people laugh at all, even in English about them, you have to get a bit of an understanding about the people, you know. But obviously, to get the understanding of the people, you need to learn the language. So
you did the same thing here. Before, obviously, you took a year or so to learn Chinese, but you lived with a family here, and then you took part in classes, and then you started this working, and once you got a sufficient level, doing some stand-up in the language. Is it the two languages, just learning them? As somebody who's coming to them both from almost zero, most people would say, oh yeah, Irish has got to be easier than Chinese. What would you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, Irish is probably easier than Chinese. You know, just in terms of exposure over the years, I probably knew more Irish than I thought that I did. But it's hard to know. The thing that's easier about learning Chinese for me is the immersion is better. It's almost impossible to create a good language atmosphere when learning Irish, because there's nowhere you can go that people don't speak English. When you're learning Irish, you're always talking to somebody who can speak perfect English. You know, like English
it's a bit artificial.
Yeah, so you have to really keep people committed to your cause, and you have to keep committed yourself to speaking the language, whereas in China, that's not the case. So the immersion was much greater here. You know,
how did you find, say, the two families? Like, you're living with a family in Ireland, an Irish family here. What was that experience like?
Huge difference. First of all, I'm famous in Ireland. In as modest a way as I can say it. Yeah, like, but I am famous in Ireland. Like, everybody in Connemara where I was excited that I was there. They knew who I was. You know, the whole bloody place knew that there was this, you know, the comedian
guy
from the
television
is in town for the year. It was also much easier to make friends because I was playing gaelic football there. And you know, it wasn't a huge culture gap. I knew Ireland, you know. The only thing that was changing was the language, but I knew a lot about Ireland. In China, you know, I had to learn a lot more before I really started to engage with people. But in saying that, how much I had to learn to engage with people was just a much better motivator for language acquisition than the experience that I had in Connemara. So then, like, living with the two families is completely different too, because, you know, well, first of all, you're living in an apartment in China with a family. So I'm like in a 3-bedroom apartment with a family. And I wasn't eating all my meals with the family in Connemara. I was eating all my meals with the family here. The immersion was much deeper. But it was handy because I had to learn so much. I had to learn about the do's and the don'ts at the dinner table in China.
Like what was difficult?
Well, you know, all the simple ones at the beginning, like don't put your chopsticks in the rice. You know, like the one joke that everybody tells, which is totally true, is like, don't keep finishing the food. Like, just leave, when you're full, just like stop eating and leave it. Because we think it's rude to leave it, but then they think like you're not full, so they keep feeding you.
Did you put on weight?
Well, I actually didn't, because I think I ate much healthier when I came to China. You know, I just ate a lot less fast food.
So you learned Chinese through this course, and when did you do your first gig? Like, you have to stand up and do a gig in Chinese. How long did that take?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, that came a little quicker than I expected, about 8.5 months. But that was only because I stumbled upon a little stand-up scene that was brewing, and they kind of forced me to get up on stage. I wasn't looking to do it that early. But I mean, you know, I did a lot of gigs in English, but then I also like worked in a restaurant. I did a lot of different things to up the immersion. So the stand-up gig, like, I feel like a hell of a lot of stuff went down before the stand-up happened. Do you know what I mean? And the stand-up was just meant to be the end product of the series. But what happened was, I got absorbed into this like brand new stand-up comedy scene, and then that in itself sort of became a whole separate project. I actually feel like we could have made a separate series about an emerging stand-up scene.
So you became involved in helping to establish some sort of a stand-up scene in China, where one doesn't really exist as it would be recognised outside. This is both in Chinese and in English? Like, have you got a mixture?
No, the English thing is completely separate. I was doing that from the get-go. I started my own gig, and then there's some guys that have like a kind of a newer comedian night here too. And that's all bubbling away. But that's expat stuff, man. Like, it's great and all, but it's limited, and it's really Western, really. I mean, people are talking about their experiences in China, and that's unique.
So it's the comedy equivalent of going to an Irish pub in Beijing or something like that.
100%, yeah, which is absolutely fine, and I do it, and I enjoy it, and I get to mouth off about things that only foreigners that live in China understand, and that's great, but that's a very limited market. It's a limited amount of people. I mean, I don't think of it in terms of a market, but I think of it in terms of, this is just for us. You know, it's water cooler office jokes, you know, in a way. It's just for us that live here. But no, the stand-up comedy in Chinese, well, it's really interesting because they don't know what they're doing at all. Like, from how to perform on stage, to how to write jokes, to, more importantly, how to organize this thing. So they've immediately adopted a bit of a Chinese method of, they develop in teams, and you sort of, you basically like have an allegiance to your team. So once you sort of say that you're this team stand-up comedian, then it's expected that you wouldn't gig anywhere else. You don't even need to know anything else about China, but essentially there's an element of collectivism about it. You know, there's just this element of somebody takes a role of leadership, and then people sort of get in behind that leader. That seems to be something that's embedded in the culture, you know? And how quickly people respect that leadership authority is pretty fascinating. Because very quickly you have these people that, I mean, essentially people with no experience of doing stand-up comedy are then telling other people who have a little bit less experience than them like, this is how you do it, and if you do it the wrong way, then you will be punished.
Where do you fit in there then?
Well, I'm a disaster for these guys. Because what happened was, so I showed up and like I just started watching, you know, because I wanted to film them and I wanted to talk to them about their experiences. But they were just like, and now this is not a boast on my behalf, this is what they were saying to me. It's like, you're the only one in this country other than Huang Xi, other than Zhou Wang, who you've talked to before. You're the only one that knows what to do. And I had actually run gigs in Dublin for years, so they really wanted me to tell them how to run gigs.
So on the management side, not just on the how to tell a joke side.
They really wanted me to help them with that.
Right.
But the problem was, I was telling them how to do it in the Western way, which essentially, I guess, was a challenge to the authority of one of the team, the team leader, you know, who wanted to establish the team method. Now, I mean, that team method is absolutely fine, but it's a little bit problematic because new comedians especially need stage time and they need new audiences. And so, long story short, originally I opened my own show under their banner, you know, because basically they were asking me how to do it and then just like ignoring everything I said. And I was just getting a little bit bored with them keeping asking me, because I was like, guys, I have no problem helping you. Like, I love it actually. Like, I absolutely loved working with them. But you keep asking me and then you keep doing it the other way, which of course is absolutely fine, but it's because it's your thing. But I'm just gonna have a little pop at doing what I know how to do. So I started a gig in Renmin University where I was studying at the time. And that was the beginning of a major clash then with the.
What about like the actual, you're talking, you've done gigs here in English, the expat community, and sort of everything's open, and then you're doing a gig in Chinese. What about the problems of doing gigs? Because you think comedy, this is about surprise, maybe shocking on occasions, giving people the unexpected. Anathema to what the authorities here think of stability, everybody in harmony and happy. Are there things you can't touch?
Well, I mean, obviously there's things you can't touch. I mean, that's a given. If you've got a group of 100 people in a room, you're just not going to say things you shouldn't say.
Are there things that don't work culturally, not just because...
Well, shock, you mentioned shock. Like, shock we've come to accept as like a way of making people laugh in the West. Not a big method here, you know. Dirty material, not a big method, not a big thing here. But yet they do some dirty stuff, but what they consider dirty is quite juvenile to us, quite, you know, quite innocent in a way, which is fine. What takes the place? I mean, they definitely like when foreigners sort of have a go at sort of the cultural differences. For them, I think the main topics, say, of 2013, 2014 were like house prices. Corruption you can talk about a little bit because that's quite a public campaign.
It's officially been cracked down.
Yeah. Pollution is always a joke for the comedians.
Right.
A lot of them talk about like the pressures of getting married and dating. Like, that's a universal one, you know. And that's a big issue here because culturally they're under a lot of pressure from their parents to get married, you know, once they graduate.
So more the social, cultural topics.
All that stuff is up there. And then, you know, obviously like Shaoxun, you know, the sort of filial piety, the sort of authority of the parents is a big thing here. And that's an area that some of them try to tackle to a degree. And to us, that might seem a little juvenile, but to them, that's a pretty big deal for them to sort of suggest that, you know, the generation gap is such that we need to discuss the fact that our parents don't understand us in any way, shape, or form. Like, I'm convinced that the generation gap between a sort of a 55-year-old in China and a 25-year-old in China is one of the biggest gaps on the planet. Like, you know, somebody that sort of experienced the childhood of the Cultural Revolution and somebody who experienced the childhood of, like, economic boom. They've just completely from another planet, really. So I think there's, you know, sometimes they talk.
You mentioned that filial piety towards the father and the mother and the parents, and you did a show and you wrote a book which concerned very much your relationship with your father. My dad was nearly James Bond. Right? Could a Chinese comedian, do you think, do something like that, go into that sort of personal level?
Well, I actually put Chinese subtitles on that and showed it one night. And the woman that I was living, you know, the woman from the house that I was living in came with the grandmother, actually. And, I mean, they loved it. They thought it was interesting, but it's a fundamentally different relationship to anything they've ever seen before. Like, Joe Wang might have mentioned this too, but, you know, it's not that easy to take, like, a serious issue and turn it into a joke here. like I had testicular cancer when I was 24. Like I have a lot of routines about that in English. I don't translate a lot of routines into Chinese and do them for the Chinese audience. But I said I would have a go because the structure of those jokes translates quite easy, actually.
Right.
The subject matter, not so much. So, I mean, I tried, but it's not that they didn't get the jokes. It's just they just don't perceive in any way, shape, or form that you would discuss that.
That's just not funny.
Yeah, you know, they would just be like, why would you be joking about that? But then I did it in English with a lot of Chinese people at one of our English language gigs. And they can laugh then when it's in English, but that's because they immediately switch into this sort of like, this is another culture.
Yeah.
But once it's in the Chinese language realm,
Do you feel this might be some aspect of looking around and see if people are laughing at it first before laughing yourself?
I don't know if they're not. It's not that. I tell you, I've talked to a lot of Westerners that have learned Chinese, and they all made me afraid of what I could and couldn't say. And I am of the opinion that they're all wrong. That actually Chinese people are quite willing to laugh at most things. In terms of like the testicular cancer stuff, that's just more, I think, a lack of exposure to that type of humor. I don't think it's like a can we or can we not laugh at this. I just think it's more just like they haven't come around to why that would be funny yet. I don't think it's a case of being uncomfortable with this. You know, I don't think it's a case of being uncomfortable with laughing at it or not.
If you've sat down with a Chinese family at a family dinner and you are in that family, you will find most things can be discussed, but it may not be translated into a public venue like a stage or even a bar.
Yes,
where it's gonna take
100%.
place.
And there's, like, I can give you a really good example that articulates how once you put things into a certain cultural realm for Chinese people, they change. In the early days of China, I was dating this Chinese girl, and she had very good English. And without getting too graphic, we were flirting via text in a very descriptive way. So I attempted to continue the conversation in Chinese.
Right.
And she wasn't uncomfortable with me texting in Chinese, you know, stuff, sexual stuff. But she told me that she can't text in Chinese herself because the minute that she texts dirty in Chinese, she feels guilty. But in English, no problem. It's funny how she immediately perceives in her own language that it's dirty, whereas in English she's completely liberated. So I think there's just sometimes you put Chinese people into a certain cultural context and they just think that there's a certain way that you should behave.
Well, speaking of dating, you actually went on two. You're in danger of becoming a serial
I'm
dating
done with
show
it
guest,
now.
right? Okay, but you did two.
Two.
Right. Tell us about the experience of either of those.
Well, Bali Tawi, the reason why I did the first dating show was because, well, actually, I was asked to be honest.
These are sort of like the American show.
Copies of Take Me Out.
Take Me Out. Okay,
They're
I don't see a
copies
lot of American TV.
Yeah. Actually, that's a British format. We hate doing it, but we'll give them credit. It's a British format, and I did a gig. I opened up for Joe Wong in Shanghai for 5 nights at Christmas time, and there was a big favor he did for me in Chinese with 10.5 months. I was 10.5 months in, and I opened up for Joe Wong, got paid and everything. So the producers of Bai Li Taoyi were at the venue,
right.
and I used Bai Li Taoyi as a punchline because it was a joke about Fei Cheng Wu Rao. Bai Li Taoyi is like a little bit below, but it's very popular in Shanghai. So they told me, say Bai Li Taoyi, don't say Fei Cheng Wu Rao. And then the producers of the show were there, and they were like, oh, this guy's great fun. So they invited me onto Bai Li Taoyi. So the reason why I did it was because it would have been great for the series, our series in Ireland. So I did it, and but it turned out to be great fun, and it went really well. My Chinese held up a lot better than I expected. But the problem was, afterwards, everybody was like, oh, you should do Fei Cheng Wu Rao. What are you doing Bai Li Taoyi?
Which is one of the most watched programs in the Chinese-speaking world.
Yeah. So 40 million people watch it in China, and then it gets watched. Really gets watched a lot. I actually got recognized a good bit when I went back to New York just recently from being on Fei Cheng Wu Rao. But everybody's like, you should be on that. And I hadn't like hooked up with a girl on the first show. So
Well, you were rejected.
yeah, I was rejected by all of them for being too old. One of them called me old uncle.
You got to dye your hair.
It's
like
worth.
a politician.
I dyed. My hair was dyed at that time. Actually, it wasn't dyed on Fei Cheng Wu Rao, and I got a girl on Fei Cheng Wu Rao. But
That's
anyway,
respect for the
Bai
other.
Li Taoyi, they were very young. I mean, it was great fun. Not getting a girl was great fun. The girl, when you don't get a girl on Bai Li Taoyi, they make you pick a girl and see if you can like turn her. Which is essentially just a way to you get a public rejection on the telly. It's good telly for them. So she came out and she said, "My mother is only 6 years older than you." So I said jokingly, is your mother hot? Which of course, like, she didn't get. I mean, it was funny. Some of the girls laughed, but she was just like, no, my mother is married. Like, you know, she's like offended. But anyway, I didn't get a girl on that. So because I hadn't got a girl, I was allowed to go on Feichun Wurao. But Feichun Wurao wasn't as much fun because actually Feichun Wurao it's such a successful format. You're basically like a pawn in the thing. Bali Tawi, they wanted me to just perform. Like, they wanted me to just look good on the telly. Whereas Feichun Wurao, I was just another pawn in the game.
It translates to what it's like, if you're not sincere.
Yeah, F off.
F off, yeah. But nobody's going on it sincerely, are they?
I wouldn't imagine many. I mean, like, people always say, is it fake? You know, they always ask, like, and I always say, like, well, it's not really fake, but let's be honest. If you've just met somebody who's like nearly 100, like the studio's actually, you know, that normally you go to a television studio and people are like, wow, the studio's so much smaller than I expected. The Feichun Wurao studio is humongous. So you literally can't see the girls that well. They're like miles away. So like, how are you supposed to like make a really good decision about somebody? So like, the one girl in the end left their light on when I was on.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you want to pick this girl if you don't just walk away? It's like, of course I'm going to pick the girl.
Even though I can't see her.
Not to mention, when I first walked out, 23 of them left their lights on.
Yeah.
Which means that if 22 or more leave their lights on, and then you get a girl at the end, you actually win a trip to the Maldives. So I won a trip to the Maldives on Feichun Wurao.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I was pretty, with a year and 5 months of Chinese, I won a trip to the Maldives on Chinese TV. But I couldn't
full
go.
of Chinese people
She
anyway.
went, I couldn't go. But she was a nice girl. I met her once afterwards. So that's honest. Like, I'd say it's not fake because I met some girl, the equivalent of like buying a girl a drink and you say, let's have a date next week. We went on one date. Very nice girl, but like no way were we going to meet up again. And so that's not fake.
Was she or was anybody aware that back in Ireland you came third in a poll of who do you want to be your fantasy father for Irish women?
Oh, yeah.
Colin Farrell at the top and then you somewhere in third place?
I mean, Colin Farrell, very attractive, man. But serious history there. You know, it's a lot of risk to have him as number one fantasy father.
But that's 8% of Irish women said, I would like Des Bishop to meet the fantasy father of my child now. 8% of Chinese women, if they knew about it, that's what?
Well,
40 million?
Actually, what is his name? Meng Fei, the host of Feichun Wurao, did give me a lot of face. Like, he bigged me up big time and said I was very famous in Ireland. I was the Irish him and all this.
Yeah.
So I mean, he did give me a lot of face, but no, they didn't mention the. I'm sure if any of my ex-girlfriends, if any of my ex-girlfriends saw that, you know what, those girls are right. He'd be a great father, but he's a terrible boyfriend. So just have a kid straight away, because he'll probably look after the kid better than he'll look after you.
Do you feel you've achieved what you want to do here? You've been here. It seems to have become sort of a second base for you now. You're back and forwards between here and Ireland and wherever else you're gigging around the world. Is there a special connection with China?
Yeah, well, my original goal was to come and make a series, and the problem is that China just got in, you know, it got into me. It happens to a lot of people. Like,
It's happened to the Mongolians.
Yeah, and the Manchu. You know, as I say jokingly on stage, I say, China, it gets in your blood and it gets in your lungs, and there's nothing you can do about that. But I couldn't leave after a year of like finally being able to speak the language and communicate with people. I just wanted to experience something deeper. Long term, I don't know. I mean, on one level, I've achieved more than I've expected, but then on another level, I feel like there's a huge amount of opportunity here, and I probably have started to go back to the West more than I should to achieve that opportunity. So I'm more conflicted in terms of like, have the achievements been good or not? But certainly, like in terms of like life-changing experience, absolutely loving it. You know, just I'll look back on these 2 years and just whatever happens after them, they will be one of the better 2-year periods of my life. Absolutely love China, love the friendships I've made, love the conflicts that I've had. The whole thing has been like 100% amazing. So I guess on that level, yeah, like I've achieved what I've wanted to achieve.
Well, I was going to ask you, what would you most, or do you most hate, what do you most love about China? But I think you've sort of summed it up.
The answer to that is China. That is the answer to that. The thing I love and hate most about China is China.
Des Bishop, thanks very much for coming on The Level.
Thanks, man.